Hello everybody and welcome to my review of volume number 1 of Nisioisin's light novel series Nisemonogatari. Now of course, even though this is number 1 of Nisei, it is in fact volume number 4 of the Monogatari series if you go by Japanese numbering. If you're going by English numbering, it's volume number 5. I'm not too sure whether I should keep saying both or just stick with the English because those are the only ones that I've read and reviewed, but in any case, this one is released in English by Vertical. If you want to pick up a copy, I do have a link in the description down below, both for Amazon and the Book Depository if you are shopping internationally, because they'll ship anywhere in the world for free. This volume now shifts our focus to two new heroines. While they're not really new, we've of course had them mentioned in the previous novels, and those of course are Araragi's sisters, Karen and Tsukihi. Now these sisters have the nickname the Fire Sisters, and for very good reason. They are incredibly bold. They have this pretty much overblown sense of justice and feel that it is up to them to make sure that justice is served. In this novel, we mainly focus on Karen, although Tsukihi is definitely a part of it, and this has the Fire Sisters trying to find out the source of the charms. If you remember from Sengoku's story back in Bakemonogatari Volume 2, the source of the charms that middle school kids are using that's causing a lot of conflict. And even though no one's really been cursed in the same way that Sengoku was, this is causing a lot of personal relationship type strife, and so the sisters figure that this is something that needs to be stopped. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Monogatari book without somebody getting afflicted by an aberration, and of course, Koyomi getting dragged into it and having to figure out how to solve that person's problems. Now, if you take into account how these books were released in Japan, Bakemonogatari came first, and then Nisemonogatari came second, and then of course this series then became third. And it's interesting to me because if you take a look at Bakemonogatari, that series is incredibly heavy with dialogue. The plot is almost subservient to the dialogue. Nisemonogatari sort of switches that thing and flips it on its head, and even though we do still have a bit of Nisioisin's sort of trademark banter, it certainly takes sort of a second seat to a lot more action and a lot more of a plot-driven story. This book then, I would say, finds a little bit more of a balance between the two. It definitely feels a lot more plot-heavy to me than Bakemonogatari, but it definitely has a lot more of that back-and-forth banter that we didn't get quite as much of in Nisemonogatari. This one, it's kind of an interesting book to me because it finally kind of breaks the mold of Bakemonogatari. And again, it's kind of a weird thing to have read Kitsu first and then read Bake and then read this, which is reverse of what it was released in Japan. Because when you're reading Bakemonogatari and then you read this, it seems like to me, it felt stylistically very different. But like I said, if you use Kisu in between the two, you can sort of see where this becomes the blend. So that we have a story that is a lot more plot-driven. For instance, there's actually an antagonist in this one, whereas in the Bakemonogatari series, we really didn't have an antagonist. There wasn't like a villain per se. There were, of course, people that were afflicted by the aberrations, but the aberrations were just doing what aberrations do. They weren't really like villains with an intent per se. So in this book, we flip that a little bit. We get an antagonist. So we actually have a face to put on this sort of villainy that's going on in the city. And the aberration in this case is very different in a sense. And this book begins to sort of flesh out, I would say, an idea of the origins of aberrations and how aberrations can almost be manipulated in a sense based on a person's belief. It also, of course, breaks the mold because in Bakemonogatari and even in Kisumonogatari, we had Oshino as this character who had all of the knowledge, and even though he didn't technically save people, he was certainly involved with trying to find the solution to their problems. Now, in this volume, Oshino is gone. So it's now up to Araragi to kind of pool his resources of the people he knows to try and find solutions for himself, which I really liked how this is now breaking that up and it's changing sort of the narrative a little bit. And what I find really interesting is in the afterword, Nisioisin says that he wasn't even going to release this book and that it was kind of written initially as a personal project, which seems weird to me because a lot of stuff happens in this book that seems very vital to the forward motion of the Monogatari series. Like I said, in terms of Araragi's character being more developed in terms of trying to find his own solutions, there is a pretty large development in terms of his relationship with Shinobu, and of course that becomes very important when you consider, and again, this is kind of a weird thing, right? Because Kisumonogatari introduced us to Kishot, who of course ends up becoming Shinobu, and if you read that first, and then read Bakemonogatari, and then read this, it's a pretty big, stark difference now, Shinobu, in terms of how she's acting, how she speaks, and everything else. It was almost kind of jarring in a way, and it's not a bad way. I'm not saying that, but you know, when you've gone through 3 books with her being this mute and almost a shadow of an existence, and all of a sudden in this book she very much asserts herself. It was a little bit jarring, and I was actually really happy to see her character return. But I think if you read it Bake, then Kisu, then this, it probably wouldn't have that same effect because, of course, you know what Kishot is like. It's fresh in your mind just coming off of Kisumonogatari. In any case, this volume, I really, really liked it. I enjoyed the fact that it pushed forward in terms of some key relationships. It developed some key relationships. It felt like I'm interested to see now. Like with Hanakawa, we started seeing a bit of a change in her, a moving forward because of her experiences in Bakemonogatari Volume 3 and in the Cat's Tail story. In this one now, Senjo Gahara, she sort of says like, with this book, she's going to sort of let go of her past and move forward. So again, this book feels like we're still sort of in transition. We're still changing the series up. We have new things happening. We have new relationships happening. We have characters trying to find a new path because they can't fall back on their old ways like they have in all the other books. So to me, it's kind of an exciting point in the series. And like I said, it seems really weird to me that Nisioisin would then turn around and say, well, I never really intended to release this, because I just don't really see. Now, I mean, of course, I'm reading these as they release in English, so I don't know what the story becomes down the road, but I just don't see where this series could develop further without something like this. So all in all, I thought this one was really, really good. In fact, there were times when I read the Bakemonogatari series that I felt a little bit stalled, that I didn't really feel like it was dragging me forward, and I think that's because it was so just in the moment dialogue heavy, whereas this one, it felt like there was more of that plot pulling me forward, and it felt more like the conversations weren't just idle banter for the sake of banter. A lot of them were there because of they were developing relationships and developing characters. So a really positive experience with this one for me. Now I want to talk something really briefly because it kind of occurred to me as I was reading this book last week, or well, not last week actually, just a couple days ago. I posted a review for the Ryuo's Work Is Never Done. I can never get that word Ryuo. It never comes out really well. Anyway, I posted a review for that, and as much as I liked part of the stories, one of the things that I was really sort of took exception to was the very double entendre allusions to sexuality between, or sexual activity between a 9-year-old and a 16-year-old character. And yet when I'm reading this book, I realize that like Hachikuji technically age-wise would be about 9 or 10, and Araragi even goes so far to call his behavior towards her, sexual harassment. And there's a couple of other sort of, there are certainly sexual overtones and undertones to this series. In this book, there's quite a bit more like nudity, even though it's not really sexual in context. And it struck me as I was reading it, I'm like, am I a bit of a hypocrite because I'm not as bothered by this book as I was by the Ryuo's work is never done? But I think I kind of came to a conclusion about why that is. And it may seem to sort of, and I guess I'm going to talk about it because, first of all, I hate feeling like I'm a hypocrite. And secondly, because I think it speaks to this series and it speaks to writing in general. And what I came up with basically is that what bothered me was two things: author intent and positions of power. So in the Ryuo's work is never done, the very, very first thing that's done in the book, and as a writer, I've written a couple of books. I read a lot about writing, the art of writing, and everything else. And I think even as readers, we all know that the beginning of the book is meant to hook you. If the first couple pages of a book don't bring you in, you feel very, very kind of hesitant to keep going. It's so important. So in the Ryuo's work is never done, that key component is used to try and make you, the reader, believe that there is something sexual happening between a 9-year-old and a 16-year-old. That bothers me because it's the author's intent that I will think that. The author is intentionally trying to make me believe that there is a improper relationship going on. And also the other thing, and this goes into my sort of aspects of power, the 9-year-old calls the 16-year-old master. There is definitely a power difference in these two characters. This character obviously looks up to this 16-year-old. This 9-year-old obviously views this 16-year-old as being in some way in control of her. And that is where that really bothered me, because I'm like, you as the author are intentionally trying to get me to read this series by hinting at this kind of improper relationship, and also between two characters where there is a vast power difference between them. And I guess the reason that Monogatari doesn't bother me as much is because, A, the author is always hard on his sleeve. We know, like, the book series doesn't try to get us to read it because of sex or because of the hints at sex or whatever. The series gets us to read it because, for the most part, we have characters who are funny, interesting, have depth to them, and who get involved in these sort of weird kind of situations that, in some cases, actually have something to say about living in general. And that's what the author's trying to sell you on. The fact that he peppers it with this sort of little bit of sexual banter, and I guess, maybe because most of the characters are late teens, 17, 18. I mean, I know at 17 and 18, like, I was nothing but raging hormones. I mean, sex is going to come up. But I think with, like, the whole thing with, like, Hachikuji in particular, because she's the youngest of all these characters and closest to the ages of those characters, and the Ryuo's work is never done. With Hachikuji, first of all, we're never given the impression that Araragi's behavior is going to go over a line. And also, funny enough, even though she's much younger, Hachikuji seems to be in control of their relationship. She seems to be the one who has that either equal or greater power when it comes to Araragi. First off, she seems completely capable of hurting him physically. Second of all, even intellectually, she challenges him. And we see her as a character in this series as being sort of a almost sage-like character that will say things to Araragi that seems to aid him in moving forward. So I think in that sense, that is why it doesn't creep me out quite as much, because I'm like, you as the author aren't trying to sell me on this series by hinting at this relationship. And also, the characters involved in these situations have an equal power balance between them, as opposed to a master-student relationship. And I know that still probably seems a little bit, but I guess it really just says to me that in terms of writing and in terms of an author's intent, yeah, you can get away with some stuff when you're not trying to frame it in a certain sense. I think that, like, even there is a scene in here where Karen is being wiped down by Araragi. She's naked. They call her naked, but it makes it sound like she's still wearing her underwear, but whatever. But it is I guess you could see it as a sexual thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if the anime played it up fan service wise, but to me, it doesn't ring that way because this is a brother just caring for his very sick sister, and that comes really across in the writing. The writing isn't meant to make you think that, there's going to be an improper relationship between brother and sister. And yes, I know there's a toothbrush scene coming up, and yes, I have an idea of what that toothbrush scene is. I'm just talking about this book. We'll get to that when that book comes along, and it'll come soon because I've got it on the shelf. In any case, I just wanted to say those things because, like I said, it just struck me as I was reading this book that it was like, oh, I kind of encountered some somewhat similar stuff in the Ryuo's work is Never Done, but it really kind of irked me in that book, whereas this one, not so much. And those are the two main reasons that I came up with. I guess it's just because the Ryuo's work is Never Done. It just made me feel like the writer was thinking that I was a pedophile when he wrote that book, and that would be why I wanted to read it. And in this one, it doesn't seem like Nisioisin thinks of me that way, and maybe that's why. Maybe it just boils down to I was insulted, and in this one I'm not. I don't know. Let me know if you guys think if you have any thoughts about any of these things, let me know down in the comments down below. In any case, that long and overblown discussion, that is the end of my review of Nisemonogatari number 1. A really good entry in the Monogatari series. Actually has me a lot more interested and excited for the future books in the series than I would say at least the first 2 volumes of Bakemonogatari made me feel about the series. So all in all, I'd say the series is on an up and up as far as I'm concerned. So with all that, my next review is a book that I am very excited to read, and mainly because of all of you and a bunch of other light novel fans on the net who are incredibly hyped over this title, and that is volume number 1 of The Empty Box and Zeroth Maria. This one, obviously, it has been a huge fan favorite on the My Anime list. It's been constantly up there at the top number 1 spot or in the top 5 or whatever for light novels in that list. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm really fingers crossed that it lives up to that hype. So that will be my next review. So if you're brand new to the channel and you love light novels, you should consider subscribing. I do 2 to 3 reviews every single week, as well as a weekly countdown of the top 10 best-selling light novels in Japan. Thank you all for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.